All right, welcome back everyone for another deep dive.
Always fun to be back.
Today we're tackling a book that's kind of a legend, kind of infamous in the world of personal finance. Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki.
Yeah, this one's been a bestseller for ages, but it definitely attracts its fair share of controversy.
For sure, and that's what we're here to explore. What's the deal with this book? Why does it get people so fired up? Just to set the stage, the whole book is built around Kiyosaki sharing these financial lessons he supposedly got, contrasting them.
Right, from his own dad, who he calls the poor dad, versus his friend's father, the rich dad.
And that's where things get interesting, right? Because one dad's preaching job security, the classic route, and the other is all about financial independence.
It's definitely a captivating story, that's for sure, and it kind of sucks you in, but then you hit this wall of, well, skepticism, I guess you could say.
Exactly. Like, how much of this is actually true? Was Rich Dad even a real person? There's this whole debate about whether Kiyosaki maybe took some creative liberties with that character.
And that's the million-dollar question, right? Does it even matter if the advice itself is actually good?
Like, if the story's not totally true, does that invalidate everything?
That's been the argument raging for years, honestly, and there's no easy answer.
Well, let's break it down.
Okay, so on one side, you've got people saying, look, even if we assume Rich Dad was just a character, the financial principles that Kiyosaki lays out, they still make sense.
Right. Like, on their own merits?
Exactly. They're based in logic, they're widely accepted in the financial world, and they can be super valuable if you actually put them into practice.
So is it kind of like those business books that use made-up scenarios to teach a point?
You got it. The story might be fictionalized, but the lesson is what sticks.
Like Aesop's fables, talking animals and all, but there's a moral to the story.
Exactly. Think of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. In that light, it's a parable, a way to make financial truths more engaging and memorable.
Okay, I'm kind of with you on that.
But to really get the impact, we got to dig into what those financial truths actually are.
All right, so let's set aside the whole Rich Dad debate for a sec and just talk about the book's content. What were some of the key takeaways that really stood out to you?
Well, one of the most basic but powerful ideas Kiyosaki pushes is this distinction between assets and liabilities.
And that's not just accounting jargon.
Right. It's about getting a gut feeling for what puts money in your pocket versus what sucks it out, no matter what your bank statement says.
Which leads to some pretty counterintuitive stuff.
Oh, yeah. Like everyone says owning a home, that's a great asset, right?
Yeah.
But Kiyosaki comes in and says, hold on, what if it's bleeding you dry with a huge mortgage and repairs? Suddenly it's not so simple.
Yeah, that's a mind-bending concept for a lot of folks, I bet.
Because it's challenging the norm, which
Yeah.
is kind of Kiyosaki's whole thing.
Right, he wants you to question everything you thought you knew about money.
Exactly, because he says most of us are trapped in this thing he calls the rat race.
Which we'll unpack later, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah, we'll get there, but for now, think of it like you're on a treadmill, working, paying bills, but never really getting ahead.
That feeling of running in place, putting in all the effort, but getting nowhere.
Bingo. And to escape that rat race, Kiyosaki says you need to focus on building your asset column.
Things that generate income without you constantly working, like rental properties or stocks, that kind of thing.
Exactly. He wants you to have your money working for you, not the other way around.
That's got to be appealing, especially when everyone's feeling burnt out from the daily grind.
Huge appeal, definitely. But then Kiyosaki adds another layer, the psychology of all this.
Like, it's not just about the numbers, it's about how you think about money.
Totally. He says fear and self-doubt, those are the biggest roadblocks to financial success.
So, like, even if you know what to do, your own mindset can sabotage you.
100%. He even talks about his own struggles with these mental blocks, how overcoming them was crucial to his journey.
So, Rich Dad, Poor Dad is part financial advice, part motivational pep talk.
It's a blend. For sure, he gives practical steps, but also wants you to shift your perspective on money, get rid of those limiting beliefs.
So we've got these big ideas, assets versus liabilities, escaping the rat race by building passive income and rewiring your mindset.
Those are the pillars.
But how do you actually translate that into real life? Like, for someone just starting out, it feels kind of overwhelming.
That's the natural next question, and we'll dive into that more in a bit.
Okay, good. So I'm already wondering, how do I actually do this stuff?
Well, Kiyosaki says the first step is understanding your own cash flow, like where's the money going?
It's like before you build a house, you got to know the lay of the land.
Exactly. Get a clear picture of your finances first, then you can make smart decisions about where to put your money.
So it's not just about budgeting, it's about changing your whole relationship with money.
He wants you to think differently, for sure.
This is where it gets really interesting for me, but I feel like we're just scratching the surface here.
Oh, we've got a lot more to unpack. In the next part, we'll dig into those practical steps Kiyosaki lays out and see if they hold up in today's world.
So we're back, and I'm still kind of wrestling with this whole rich dad thing.
Yeah, it's like, how much does it really matter if the story's not totally true?
Right, like does it undermine everything else Kiyosaki says? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
It's tough because, on the one hand, if this mentor figure wasn't even real, it feels like the book loses some credibility.
Yeah, you think, wait, so this whole thing could be made up.
Exactly. It's presented as a memoir, so it feels different than reading a novel where you know it's fiction.
I get that. There's a sense of, like, if the mentor isn't real, can we trust the advice?
But then again, tons of business books use fictional examples or case studies to illustrate their points.
That's true. You see it all the time, those hypothetical scenarios to make a point.
And nobody questions those, so maybe Rich Dad Poor Dad falls somewhere in between, like using storytelling to teach financial principles. Yeah, it's playing with that line between fact and fiction, which can be a bit unsettling.
For sure. But there's another critique I've heard that I want to get your take on.
Okay.
Some people say Kiyosaki oversimplifies things, like he doesn't acknowledge how complex the real financial world is.
Yeah, there's definitely some truth to that, I think.
Like, it's an easy read, it's engaging, but does that come at the cost of nuance?
Maybe to some extent. I mean, it's great for introducing those basic financial concepts, but it's important to remember this book is a starting point, not the whole encyclopedia.
It's like, it gets you interested in personal finance, but you got to go beyond that.
Exactly. It's like getting a taste of a new cuisine. It might inspire you to try more, but one meal doesn't make you a chef.
I like that analogy. It's about sparking that interest and then taking it further.
Right. You got to do your own research, maybe talk to a financial advisor, figure out what works for your specific situation.
No one-size-fits-all solution.
And the financial world's always changing. You got to adapt.
So, Rich Dad Poor Dad can be a catalyst, but it's not the be-all and end-all.
Agreed. It's a tool, not a rule book.
Okay, that makes sense. But now I'm kind of itching to dig deeper into this whole rat race concept.
Yeah, he talks about it a lot. So what does he actually mean by that?
It's that feeling of being stuck, right? Like working hard, but not getting ahead financially.
It's that cycle so many people fall into.
Mm.
Work, pay bills, accumulate debt, repeat.
And it feels demoralizing, like you're on a hamster wheel going nowhere.
Exactly. You're putting in the effort, but you're not making any real progress towards financial freedom.
So Kiyosaki's solution is to shift your focus, right? Instead of working for money, you build assets that generate passive income.
That's the core idea. He wants you to have your money working for you, not the other way around.
It's like building that asset column we were talking about, stuff that earns money without you constantly grinding.
Yeah, rental properties, dividend-paying stocks, businesses that run themselves, that kind of thing.
It's a pretty appealing idea,
Yeah.
especially these days when everyone's overworked and burnt out.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But it's not as easy as it sounds.
It takes capital, knowledge, some risk-taking, right?
For sure. And Kiyosaki acknowledges that. He doesn't sugarcoat the challenges.
But he also emphasizes that you got to push past those fears, those limiting beliefs that hold people back.
He's big on the mindset aspect, right? It's not just about strategy. It's about believing you can actually achieve financial success.
It's that whole whether you think you can or you can't, you're right kind of thing.
Your beliefs shape your reality, especially when it comes to money, he says.
So how much of it is about specific money beliefs versus just having an entrepreneurial spirit in general?
Ooh, good question. And that's where Rich Dad, Poor Dad gets really interesting, but also controversial.
All right, now you've got me hooked. We've
Yeah.
talked about the concepts, the criticisms, and now we're getting into the deeper philosophy behind it all.
And that's a whole other can of worms, which we'll crack open in the next part of our deep dive.
I'm ready for it. Bring on the philosophical debate. Okay, so we've dissected Rich Dad, Poor Dad, looked at the good, the bad, the controversial. But the big question remains, does this book still hold up in 2024?
It's been over 2 decades since it came out. The world's a totally different place, financially speaking.
Right, like the internet wasn't even a thing the way it is now. So much has changed.
And yet some people argue that the core message of Rich Dad, Poor Dad is timeless.
That whole idea of financial literacy, building assets, that's got to be relevant no matter what, right?
Those fundamental principles, like understanding your cash flow, making smart investments, they don't really expire.
True, but Kiyosaki also gets pretty specific, like He's a huge advocate for real estate
Yeah, that's where things get a bit trickier.
because the housing market has been a roller coaster, especially in recent years.
Exactly. So while the underlying principle of building assets might still be solid, the specific tactics need updating, for sure.
So it's more about understanding the spirit of the book, not just taking everything literal.
100%. You got to apply those concepts to your own situation, to the current market. Do your own research.
It's like having a good recipe. You can adapt it based on what you have, what you like.
Perfect analogy. You don't just follow the instructions blindly. You learn the techniques and then get creative.
So Rich Dad, Poor Dad is the starting point. It gets you thinking, but then you got to take it from there.
Exactly. And that actually leads to another key point: continuous learning.
Oh, yeah. He talks about that a lot, the importance of educating yourself about money.
It's not just about reading one book and you're done. Rich Dad, Poor Dad can spark that interest, but you got to keep the momentum going.
Read more, take courses, stay informed about what's happening in the financial world.
Because knowledge is power, especially when it comes to money.
So it's not about finding all the answers in one book. It's about starting a journey.
A lifelong journey for sure. And I think that's what makes Rich Dad, Poor Dad so compelling, even with all its imperfections.
It's like it gives people permission to think differently about money, to challenge the status quo.
It's that empowerment message that resonates with so many. The idea that you're not stuck, you have choices.
You can break free from that rat race, build a life on your own terms.
That's a powerful message, and I think it's what makes the book stand the test of time.
Even if some of the specifics might be outdated, that core idea still packs a punch.
For sure. And honestly, that's what I find most valuable about Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It gets people excited about personal finance. It inspires them to take control.
And that's something we can all get behind, right? Whether you agree with every single point or not.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, it's about empowering yourself financially, and that's a message that never goes out of style.
Well said. So if we had to sum up Rich Dad, Poor Dad
Yeah.
in a nutshell, what would you say is its biggest takeaway?
I think it's that spark, that realization that financial freedom is achievable. You don't have to be stuck in the rat race.
That's a legacy worth celebrating, even with all the book's flaws and controversies.
Totally agree. It's a reminder that we all have the potential to create a better financial future for ourselves.
And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
It's been a fascinating journey, and hopefully our listeners are walking away with some new insights.
Whether you love the book, hated it, or somewhere in between, hopefully it got you thinking.
And that's what matters most: starting those conversations about money, challenging our assumptions, and striving for financial well-being.
So if you're ready to continue the conversation, join us on social media. We'd love to hear your thoughts and questions.
And until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep pushing towards that financial freedom you deserve.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.